There are some moments in life that change you forever, not the loud ones, not the ones with flashing lights or screaming arguments. No, the moments that break you usually arrive in silence, or in my case with the sound of rain hitting a window. My name is Kendra, and for 3 years, I thought I had the perfect life. I was living in Austin, Texas. I had a cozy little apartment overlooking the river, and I had him, Donovan. Tall, charming, that smile that made everyone in the room feel safe. He was a real estate developer, successful, ambitious, and everyone said we were the power couple of South Congress. But you know how it is when people look at you from the outside. They see the dinner dates, the Instagram posts, the fancy cars, but they don't see the text messages you delete at 2 in the morning, and they don't see the way your stomach drops when you hear his keys in the door. I ignored the signs and I told myself I was being paranoid until the rain came, until the night he showed me exactly who he really was, and that night I didn't just lose my love, I lost everything. Let me take you back a few months before the storm. Donovan and I had just signed a lease on a new commercial space, my dream, a boutique art gallery. It was small but it was mine, and I had poured my savings into it, every penny I had earned since college. Donovan acted supportive. He came to the ribbon cutting, and he held my hand for the photos, but behind closed doors something shifted. He started calling the gallery his investment, and he said, "Kendra, you don't understand business like I do, let me handle the money." And like a fool I let him because I trusted him. He was my partner, my future husband, so why wouldn't I trust him? He set up the business accounts, and he talked to the lawyers, while I just painted the walls and hung the art. I thought I was building a life, but he was building a cage. Then came the meeting, the one where he sat me down on our leather sofa, and looked me dead in the eyes with no emotion, just that cold calculated stare. He said, "Kendra, the gallery isn't working. We are bleeding cash, so I had to restructure." I asked him what he meant, and he slid a piece of paper across the table. My name wasn't on it, and the gallery wasn't mine anymore, it was his. Every asset and every contract, he had transferred everything into his mother's holding company while I was sleeping next to him. I couldn't breathe and I stared at that paper like it was written in a foreign language. I said, "Donovan, why?" and he laughed. He actually laughed. He stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the rain that was just starting to fall. He said, "Kendra, you were never the businesswoman, you were the dreamer, and dreamers don't get to keep things, they just inspire people like me to take them." Those words, I will hear them in my sleep for the rest of my life. They just inspire people like me to take them. I tried to fight back and I told him I would call a lawyer. I told him I would ruin him, but Donovan was 3 steps ahead. He pulled out his phone and showed me emails that looked like I had sent them, emails that signed over my rights. Forgery, pure evil wrapped in a blue suit. Then came the final blow. He handed me an eviction notice, not for the gallery but for my apartment. His name was on the lease and mine was just guessed, so he kicked me out that night in the rain. I packed a single duffel bag with clothes, my laptop and my mother's necklace, and that was it. 3 years of my life reduced to 10 pounds of luggage. As I walked out the front door, the sky opened up with cold, heavy Texas rain that soaked through my jacket in seconds. Donovan stood in the doorway, dry and warm. He smiled and said, "Looks like the rain is washing away the trash." I won't lie to you, I broke right there on the sidewalk. I sat down on the curb with cars splashing past me and water dripping from my hair. I called my best friend Tanya, and she picked up on the first ring. I told her everything, and she was at my side in 20 minutes. Tanya took me to her guest room in Dallas, where for 2 weeks I didn't get out of bed, I didn't shower, and I didn't eat. I just stared at the ceiling, asking God the same question over and over: why did I trust him? But here is the thing about hitting rock bottom: it is quiet, too quiet, and in that silence you start to hear your own heartbeat. You start to remember who you were before they told you who you were supposed to be. One morning I woke up at 4 a.m., and the rain was hitting Tanya's roof, but this time, I didn't feel sad. I felt angry, a clean, sharp, useful kind of angry. I got up, I made coffee, and I opened my laptop. Donovan thought he had erased me, and he thought I would crawl into a hole and disappear, but he made one mistake. He thought I was stupid because I was kind. He forgot that kindness isn't weakness, it's patience, and my patience had just run out. I whispered to myself in that dark kitchen, he didn't take my power, He just borrowed it, and now I want it back with interest. Revenge isn't loud, at least not the smart kind, because the smart kind looks like a woman in a coffee shop with a notebook, no yelling, no threats, just facts. I started digging into Donovan's business, and let me tell you, once you know where to look, a liar leaves a trail. Donovan was a real estate developer, but his buildings weren't up to code, and I remembered little things he used to say on the phone late at night, conversations he thought I wasn't listening to, like just pour the foundation thinner because the inspector is a friend. I found that inspector, a guy named Rodney Hicks who had a gambling problem, and a gold watch that cost more than my car. I didn't threaten him, I just showed up at his office with Tanya by my side, and I asked him one question: how much does Donovan pay you to look the other way? Rodney turned white like a ghost. He didn't answer me, and he didn't have to because the sweat on his forehead told me everything. I walked out and went to the city records office, where I pulled permits for every building Donovan had completed in the last 4 years. The numbers didn't add up because they never do with cheaters. He was cutting corners on fire safety, on electrical wiring, and on structural beams. He was building death traps and calling them luxury lofts. I smiled for the first time in weeks, not because I was happy but because I had the hammer, and I knew exactly where to swing it. But I didn't go to the police yet because that would be too easy and too quick. I wanted him to feel what I felt, and I wanted him to watch his world collapse one brick at a time. This is the part where most people would mess up because they would rush and they would get emotional, but I had learned my lesson. I waited, I watched, and I planned. I created a fake identity online, a wealthy investor from California named Ms. Vance. Donovan was greedy, and that was his real weakness, not me but his own ego. So I sent him an email, polite and professional, interested in buying one of his new luxury buildings with cash offer, no banks and no questions. He bit the hook in less than 3 hours, and he replied with a video tour of the building, smiling, charming, and talking about structural integrity. I almost choked on my tea because the man who stole my gallery was now lying to my face again. He just didn't know it was me. We set a meeting at a fancy steakhouse in downtown Dallas. The day before the meeting I went to that building with a real structural engineer, a woman named Dr. Ellis who was tough as nails. She walked through those halls with a little hammer tapping the walls, and she looked at me and said, "This building is a lawsuit waiting to happen. The beams are cracked and the fire doors are fake." I had the proof, but I still didn't call the news or the police. Instead I called the tenants, all of them, families with kids, elderly couples and young professionals. I left anonymous letters in their mailboxes with simple words: get your valuables out, have your lease inspected by a lawyer, and ask about the east wall cracks. Then I waited for the dominoes to fall. The day of the meeting arrived, and of course it was raining, same gray sky, same cold drops, just like the night he threw me out. I walked into that steakhouse wearing a black blazer and red lipstick, my armor. Donovan was already at the table, and he stood up to shake Ms. Vance's hand, but he didn't recognize me at first because my hair was different, and I had lost weight. I looked like a different woman. I sat down and he started his pitch: "This building is my masterpiece, solid as a rock." I let him talk for 10 minutes, I let him lie, and I let him brag about his empire. Then I leaned forward, I pulled off my sunglasses, and I said, "Hi Donovan, miss me?" The color drained from his face faster than I have ever seen. His mouth opened and closed and opened again, and he whispered, "Kendra." I smiled and I pulled out a thick folder from my bag with photos, emails, Dr. Ellis's report, and Rodney Hicks's shaky confession. I said, "You took my gallery, you took my home, and you tried to take my spirit, but you forgot one thing, Donovan. You can't steal from someone who has nothing left to lose." He started stammering, "This is crazy. I'll call the police, and I'll say you're harassing me." I laughed, a real laugh, and I said, "Please do, because I'll hand them this folder myself, but I'm not here to send you to jail. I'm here to watch you fall." I stood up from the table, and I left the folder with him, just a copy because the original was already at my lawyer's office. I walked out into the rain, but this time I didn't sit on the curb. I stood tall, I let the water hit my face, and I felt free. The next morning the tenants I had warned started making calls, and news stations showed up with cameras in the rain, and reporters with umbrellas. One by one the families moved out, the city suspended Donovan's licenses, and the banks called in his loans. It took exactly 11 days for his empire to turn to dust. He tried to fight back and he sent me angry texts saying you ruined me and you're a monster, but I didn't reply to a single one. I just screenshotted everything and added it to the file. Then the federal investigators got involved and Rodney Hicks talked. He sang like a bird to save his own skin. Donovan wasn't just losing buildings, he was looking at real prison time for fraud and forgery. And me, I was sitting in Tanya's kitchen eating cereal and watching the news when the reporter said local developer Donovan Cross facing multiple felony charges. I turned off the TV, I looked at Tanya, and I said I want my gallery back. It wasn't about the money anymore, it was about the principle. The court agreed, and since Donovan had used fraud to steal it, the judge gave it back to me plus damages plus interest, just like I promised myself that rainy night. 6 months later I reopened the gallery with a new name and new energy, Phoenix, because that's what rises from the ashes, right? The first person through the door was an old woman who lived in Donovan's broken building. She hugged me and cried and said thank you for saving our lives. I realized then that revenge isn't really about hurting the other person, not really, it's about protecting the people they would hurt next. I didn't just fight for me, I fought for every family who slept under cracked beams, and every artist who lost their space. Donovan went to prison for 4 years, and I don't think about him much anymore, but sometimes when it rains I pause, and I listen to the sound on the roof of my gallery, and I remember the girl who sat on that curb with a duffel bag. I don't feel sorry for her anymore, I feel proud of her because she didn't stay on that curb, she got up, she fought and she won. If there is one thing I want you to take from this story, it's this: people will try to convince you that you are small, and they will try to take your light because theirs is flickering, but do not let them ever. So what did I learn? I learned that trust is not a weakness, but giving it to the wrong person twice is a mistake you can't afford. I learned to keep my name on my own papers, to read the fine print, and to love with my whole heart, but protect my wallet with my whole brain. I also learned that rain is not your enemy because rain cleans the streets, rain washes away the lies, and sometimes rain reveals who is wearing a mask. Donovan thought the rain would break me, and he thought I would dissolve like sugar, but I'm not sugar, I'm stone. To anyone watching this who feels like they are sitting on a curb in the storm right now, get up, not tomorrow, not next week, but now. You have power you don't even know about yet, you have instincts, and you have a voice, so use them. Donovan Cross is a name I barely remember, but Kendra Vance, that's the woman who rebuilt herself from nothing, and she is unforgettable. If this story touched you, and if it reminded you of a time you had to stand up for yourself, remember this: the person who tries to drown you is actually teaching you how to hold your breath, and once you learn that, you don't ever have to be afraid of the rain again. Thanks for listening, stay strong, and never let anyone steal your gallery.